Hello, my name is Shane Jones, and I'm joining you from London. I am a WSET certified educator with over 10 years experience in delivering WSET courses. I hold the Diploma in Wines and Spirits, and the WSET has over 50 years experience in designing and delivering education to help both wine professionals and consumer enthusiasts learn about these subjects, i.e. wine, spirits, sake and beer. You can take WSET qualifications in over 70 countries throughout the network, and we have over 800 course providers globally. Now, if you are interested in finding out more about embarking on WSET courses, visit wsetglobal.com to find out details about your nearest provider. So again, a very warm welcome, and I can see that we have participants from around the globe. So this is our WSET bite-sized webinar, What is Sauvignon Blanc? So in this short webinar, we'll be looking at some key points. The variety called Sauvignon Blanc. We'll be considering some of the areas around the world where we can find this grape variety being grown, and what are some of the techniques which are used by producers, meaning the winemakers that send these bottles of wines to the marketplace. And we'll be looking at some of those key regions and the styles associated with those regions. And lastly, closing with some ideas as to how to enjoy these wines as consumers and also as just students as well. Great. So let's begin, first of all, by looking at the key characteristics of this grape variety. So I would like to begin by saying that it is a white grape variety. Now, I would like to clear up a misconception that can be had sometimes in terms of how we refer to grape varieties versus varietals. Well, a grape variety is a noun and a varietal really is an adjective. So we can use a grape variety to produce a varietal wine. It has a very refreshing level of acidity. And generally, no matter where it is planted around the world, this acidity is quite refreshing. And it's one of the reasons why, as wine drinkers, we enjoy having a glass of this really refreshing wine, and why we can also age some examples of wines made with this grape variety, although aging this grape variety tends to be not the norm. It also has some very distinct floral notes. So when we bring the glass to our noses, sometimes we can be seduced by some really attractive elderflower notes. And quite often, before we even taste the wine, smelling or nosing the wine is something that we do not only as enthusiasts, but also as wine students. And this distinctive elderflower note can be quite attractive. Sauvignon Blanc is known to have a very vibrant characteristics of the fruit kind. And these different fruit characteristics will vary depending on where in the world they are being grown. I'll show you in just a minute what are some of the common fruit flavor characteristics associated with the grape variety. Now, one of the things about Sauvignon Blanc is that you can either love it, hate it, or tolerate it. And there are some who really dislike the herbaceous quality or the herbaceous profile that we can sometimes find in some of our wines produced with this grape variety. And by herbaceous, I'm talking about characteristics such as grassiness or perhaps green bell pepper, or in many cases, a very trademark asparagus set of aromas and flavors. So let's look at some of these aroma characteristics and flavor characteristics in a little more detail. In some of the coolest parts of the world where we find this grape variety being grown, we tend to find more of this herbaceous profile. So things like your green bell pepper and also your grass. Now, these particular characteristics haven't been added to the wine, but they appear, so the aroma and flavor compounds appear during the fermentation process. And this is what happens in the case of most grape varieties. So during the fermentation process, certain flavor compounds will appear that remind us of other things that we can relate to in our everyday lives. You can also see that very attractive elderflower, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And then the flavor profile of, let's say, green and citrus fruit, things like gooseberry, for example, is a trademark character of the grape variety. And in cooler conditions, we tend to see these characteristics more than, say, the tropical note, which comes from it's together with some stone fruit notes, so things like peaches, nectarine, and perhaps apricot. Now, Sauvignon Blanc as a grape variety, and like any other grape variety which is out there, prefers certain growing conditions. In this case, we have a preference for cooler temperatures for Sauvignon Blanc, and we also have a preference for moderate temperatures. Now, that's not to say that occasionally we do not find the grape variety somewhere warmer, but when that is the case, there is a little bit of a cooling influence coming from somewhere, either in the form of some breezes, perhaps from coastal vineyard areas. In some instances, this cooling influence can be from altitude provided by, let's say, for example, a mountain range. In these cooler temperatures, that green citrus fruit, which we saw on previous slide, and you can see here that there's a very clear picture of gooseberry. And I know that depending on where you are in the world, it is a flavour characteristic that you may not be very familiar with. But this is one of the trademark characteristics, a very green character, not too dissimilar, for example, to the likes of perhaps a green apple. In those moderate climates, the more tropical fruit profile will appear, and what is passion fruit. And this is something that generally gives Sauvignon Blanc away. Now, Sauvignon Blanc has this tendency to express itself in a very clear way. Remember, I mentioned the vibrant fruit characteristics together with the herbaceous notes and also a distinct floral profile in the form of elderflower notes. As a result of these attractive characteristics to be found in wines made from this grape variety, in the winery, in producing the wines, winemakers generally favor an environment which is neutral. To the left, you can see here an example of a stainless steel tank. Some instances, and particularly when Sauvignon Blanc achieves greater levels of ripeness, a winemaker may decide to flatter this by using a winemaking technique known as barrel fermentation. It simply means putting the wine or putting the grape juice, for example, into an oak barrel where this contact will allow for new aromas and flavors to appear in the final wine. These aromas and flavors can include the likes of vanilla, and we all know that vanilla is attractive. It can add things like cedar and cloves as well. In imparting these additional characteristics to the wine, we also will see that the wine, when tasted, will have more body to it, so more intensity and more weight to it. So therefore, the use of oak barrels, whether this is during barrel fermentation, meaning during the fermentation process, or whether this takes place and or at maturation, meaning aging the wine in said oak, there's an additional cost. And therefore, the use of oak is more associated with more premium wines. Sauvignon Blanc is thought to originate in the country of France, but we do find it being planted in many other places around the world. And what we'll do now is to explore where it is possibly, or where it possibly came from in France, and then go on a journey around the world and to see where we find this grape variety and various styles associated with its place of origin. The first place we're going to visit is France. And in France, in the north, we have an area known as the Loire Valley. The Loire Valley is particularly cool, and here Sauvignon Blanc is very happy, extremely, extremely happy. Producers here tend to produce the wine in a very dry style, very floral note coming through in the wine, together with some of those green and citrus notes, particularly with that gooseberry profile coming through. Now, here in the Loire Valley, there are two places which are closely associated with real high quality wines. And I'm sure that some of you have heard of the names of some of these places before. They are Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. They need very little introduction. They enjoy very high recognition amongst consumers. Now, for the most part, these wines are produced by fermenting them in stainless steel tanks. But some of the finest examples, of course, will go into oak barrels, either during fermentation, that barrel fermentation, which I mentioned a minute ago, or sometime being fermented, or sometime being matured in those oak barrels. So the Loire Valley is thought to be the home of this grape variety. However, there are some disputes from further south. So looking at the map there, you can see Bordeaux beginning to give us a little wave. So let's leave. Now, in Bordeaux, things become a little bit different. A little bit different in that we have slightly warmer conditions, meaning that temperatures can be just a little bit warmer. Depending on where in Bordeaux these grapes are grown, we can find a range of flavors, and these flavors can impact the style of wine. In block capitals here, you can see three very distinct names, and these are the names which are likely to appear on the bottle of wine. And when you see these names on the bottle, then it's likely that Sauvignon Blanc is included in that wine in some form. The style is going to be quite similar to what you will find up there in the Loire Valley. So that very distinct sort of grassy, herbaceous note. You'll find a refreshing high level of acidity and joined by some of those green and citrus fruit flavors. Occasionally, they extend into the tropical profile. For example, that passion fruit note. However, in Bordeaux, they produce some blended wines using Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is joined by another white grape variety whose name is Sémillon. Sémillon is a grape variety with a huge personality, meaning it's got a lot of weight to it. And it also has the capacity to age. And and also producers will ferment these wines in oak barrels for the purpose of adding these additional flavors and aromas which I mentioned earlier, which along the way add further complexity and weight to the wine. These are some of the finest dry wines to be found in the region of Bordeaux, further south from the Loire Valley. Right, let's see, we've got some questions popping up here. So let's see if, so, hello, can you repeat the name of the producer that oak its Sauvignon Blanc in the Loire Valley? Yes, so we have a very, very famous producer who produces several wines, but is famous for oaking some of the top wines, or some of his top wines from his estate, adding more of that complexity and weight. So a lot of people are asking the name of that producer. So yes, that's the name of the producer, Denis DipWSET. I shall try to get it typed into the chat as well. So let me very quickly just type in the name of this producer. Oh, yes, sorry. You are quite right. It's Didier Dagenot. Sorry, that's correct. Denis DipWSET is in Bordeaux. Sorry, that's my mistake. Yeah. So it is Didier Dagenot. That's correct. So my little mistake there. So we can certainly get that up to everyone. So they're just known for producing some fantastic wines. Now, outside of France, it is perhaps New Zealand that we are very much aware of this grape variety, Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc, this region, which is in the far northeastern corner of the South Island, mainly because the aromas and flavors here are really, really pronounced and really, really unique. They have such character that we fall in love with them immediately. And one of the things that also make this grape variety particularly attractive in New Zealand is the fact that the acidity is still high, very, very refreshing. You can see how Marlborough, when you look at our map here, it's quite exposed to some cooling breezes as a result of its coastal location. And so it means that although we tend to have these very distinct flavor characteristics, particularly with a more tropical profile to it, the acidity makes the wine a delight to drink. Now, over there in France, meaning the Loire Valley, and also in Bordeaux in France, we will see either Sancerre or Puy-Fumé, or perhaps we might see Grave or Pessac-Léognan, or we might see Bordeaux on the grape variety. But here in Marlborough, New Zealand, things are pretty straightforward. Sauvignon Blanc on the label, and a globally recognized style of wine, which brings such delight to many. So I've got some more questions here. Let's see if we can get those answered. So let's see, there are loads of them coming in. Will you find single varietal wines made from Semillon in Bordeaux? They are really in the minority, I would say. Of course, there are producers who are doing that. But really, either you tend to find single varietal wines from Sauvignon Blanc or the two grape varieties being blended together. Let's see. What will be the impact of climate change on the style of Sauvignon Blanc you find in Bordeaux? Will it lead to more complex blends with Semillon? Curious on your thoughts. Well, with changes in terms of climate change, well, really one of the things that we have seen more recently is warmer temperatures, really, and more intense levels of sunlight. As a result, the styles could become even more tropical. Also, it means that we might see Sauvignon Blanc or wines where we have Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon being part of a blend, having just maybe a tad less acidity. But who knows? Winemakers and grape growers are very adept. They're very skilled at adapting to challenges in the vineyard and challenges in the winery. So, who are the most famous producers in New Zealand for oak Sauvignon? I would say that one of the leading producers actually is Cloudy Bay. Cloudy Bay is one of the leading producers of an oaked example. And we also have Dog Point. Dog Point has an example which is called Section 94. And in both instances, the use of oak does bring some noticeable weight to the wine, also brings quite a lot of attractive texture to the wine as well. And in both cases, the wines have, from my experience, been age-worthy, where they have taken on, in my experience, have taken on some additional notes with the bottle age becoming more honeyed in particular, an obvious nutty note. Okay, now let's continue to move on around the world in terms of our journey. We'll continue to keep an eye on those questions. I can see that some of them are still coming in. And now we go to Chile. Chile, like New Zealand, is in the southern hemisphere. And we have a particular region which is known as the Casablanca Valley. And the Casablanca Valley, as you can see here from this map, is very exposed to quite a lot of influence from the Pacific Ocean to the west. Now, the influence there comes in the form of a cooling influence. So, for example, sometimes these windy conditions are joined by cooling fog. Sauvignon Blanc here, or I should say single varietal wines are made from Sauvignon Blanc here, and they are generally dry in style, really high in acidity, and in many cases can be quite similar to what you get from New Zealand. Occasionally it can be difficult if we had a lineup of a blind taste test to be able to accurately distinguish, is this wine from the Casablanca Valley, or perhaps is it from Marlborough, New Zealand? We have that full range of characteristics as we see in New Zealand too. So green fruit, citrus fruit, very herbaceous, or not very, but moderately herbaceous. And we can see some tropical notes as well. Now, going to New Zealand, there are a couple of places, sorry, not New Zealand, we are now in Australia. There are a few places where we can find Sauvignon Blanc, varietal wines, or blends with this grape variety Semillon, which I mentioned. Now, Sauvignon Blanc, as you've probably noticed already, our styles of wines are usually dry, and they hold on to that acidity. We can see here in the Western Australia, this area known as Margaret River. Our wines here tend to be more medium-bodied, and as we saw over there in Bordeaux, here they can be blended together with some Semillon, these Sauvignon Blanc wines. These wines here can sometimes also see some barrel fermentation or maturation in oak, so a wide range of styles to be found here too. moving away from Western Australia, there is a very high altitude location known as the Adelaide Hills. And the Adelaide Hills benefits from cooling influences coming from the Southern Ocean and also benefiting from windy conditions, all combined with altitude. So here again, we have a very high acid wine. We have one which is dry in style and where occasionally producers will blend it with Sauvignon Blanc. Now, the last place we're going to visit in terms of Sauvignon Blanc, in terms of regions, is California. And in California, there is an area known as the Napa Valley. California, of course, being in the United States. The outlier in all places that we've visited so far, mainly because it is relatively warm. In fact, it is absolutely warm. And here our Sauvignon Blanc tends to ripen extremely well and takes on really strong tropical aromas and flavors. And our acidity can slip more into the medium level. Now, Sauvignon Blanc here in the Napa Valley rose to fame as a result of Robert Mondavi, who fell in love with these wines coming from the Loire Valley, but decided to mature these wines in oak for the purpose of adding some vanilla and smoke notes. Sometimes you might see on the label the expression Fumé Blanc. Now, not all producers will age their wines or mature their wines in oak. So even when you see the name Fumé Blanc on the label, it's really difficult to know what to expect. Really, really pronounced and intense set of vanilla and smoke notes coming from oak maturation when they are used. Now, Sauvignon Blanc is one of those grape varieties which we can either enjoy on its own, well, preferably with friends, especially those styles coming from the Loire Valley and from Bordeaux, which are unoaked, where producers have used stainless steel tanks. It works extremely well with food, and some of the common suggestions which work extremely well include the likes of goat's cheese, but particularly those which are fresh or have a milder character to them. Quite a lot of vegetables. Asparagus works extremely well. Also the likes of tomatoes, broccoli. Being a seafood lover myself, I like to enjoy mine with a whole range of things from the sea, including the likes of oysters. Basically, you can do whatever you like. The time has gone really, really, really quickly. Let me just choose a couple before we bring it to a close. So I've got a question here. Can you say something about Sauvignon Blanc and Sauternes? So Sauternes is the name of a sweet wine which is produced in Bordeaux, plays a supporting role in that sweet wine. So Semillon, that grape variety which I mentioned, will play the main role. It's the main reason why we can have some sweet, or why we have sweetness in the wine. And Sauvignon Blanc, with its very high level of acidity, contributes its acidity, so making that sweet wine particularly refreshing. Let's see, what else have we got here? What are the most influential terroir factors that weighs more in the aromatics of Sauvignon Blanc? Ah, that is that's quite a really advanced level question, and there really isn't one answer. But I'll mention some of the things. So, depending on the orientation of your vines towards the sun, towards the equator. Um, if you have a grape, you can see more of that tropical fruit characteristics together with more of the herbaceous notes. The herbaceous notes sometimes can be even more exacerbated when you have less of that sunlight. So it's really, really not here or there. Limestone soils are pretty great at retaining the level of acidity in some of the wines. So it's really, really hard to say that there's one answer. And last question, quick comment on South Africa's Sauvignon Blanc is more closely associated with the likes of Constantia. Constantia is a very cool area, and here takes a very long time for the grapes to ripen. So it can take on a very ripe set of characteristics, not too dissimilar again to what you find in New Zealand, and together with that really trademark level of acidity. There's another area in in South Africa, which is called Elgin, and the style there can be a little bit more restrained, so less of that tropical fruit profile and more of the green and citrus. Again, my name is Shane Jones, and lastly, please remember, if you are interested in our qualifications, you can visit our Where to Study page at wsetglobal.com, where you can find your nearest course provider. Thank you very much.